Marriage is one of the oldest ideas we have, a real cornerstone of society. But think about it. For something that's supposed to last forever, how did we come up with a way to just end it? Okay, let's dive into this, because the story of divorce in India is this incredible journey from a sacred promise to a really complex legal reality. So, this is where it all began. In the traditional Hindu view, marriage wasn't just a social contract you signed. Oh no, it was a sacrament, a holy bond so deep that even death wasn't the end. The idea was that this union would literally carry on through your next lives. And boom, there's the paradox. How do you possibly create an off-ramp for something that was designed to be an infinite loop? This single question is right at the heart of a huge legal and social shift in India. And in this explainer, we're going to track that exact journey.
To really get a grip on this, we have to start with that original idea of marriage as a samskar, a holy sacrament. This wasn't just about a wedding ceremony. It was seen as a profound religious duty.
See, this type of marriage wasn't really about personal happiness or finding your soulmate. It was a duty. A man was actually considered incomplete without his wife. The main goals were 1, have a son to carry on the family name, 2, pay your spiritual debts, and 3, perform religious duties together. All of this made the bond a social and religious must-have, and because of that, it had to be permanent. And this wasn't just some philosophical idea. It was written into ancient legal texts like the Manusmriti. It literally says a wife can't be sold or just rejected. Once that knot was tied, it could never be untied. So under this system, divorce was, for all intents and purposes, completely impossible.
But, and this is where it gets really interesting, another totally different idea about marriage was coexisting in India. This was the idea of marriage not as a sacrament, but as a straightforward contract. And this created a fundamental clash of ideas in the legal world. And here you can see the two philosophies right next to each other. On one side, you have the Hindu view, it's eternal, it's holy, it's unbreakable. On the other, you have the perspective from Muslim law, which viewed marriage or nikah as a civil contract. And here's the kicker. Contracts, by their very nature, can be broken. They can be dissolved.
So what does that look like in practice? Well, under a contractual marriage, the legal side is very different. All you really need is an offer and acceptance in front of witnesses. Sure, you might have religious ceremonies, but they aren't the thing that makes it legally binding. And because it's a contract, it has clauses for how to end it, which totally set the stage for a new way of thinking about the end of a marriage.
So how did the concept of divorce start to creep into systems that were built on the idea of permanence? Well, it all started with the legal idea that basically required you to find a bad guy.
This was called the fault theory. Divorce wasn't something you had a right to, and it wasn't a mutual decision. Nope, it was treated like a punishment for a crime, a matrimonial offense. To get a divorce, you had to march into court and prove that your spouse was the guilty one, and you were the innocent victim. You can almost picture it like a courtroom drama, right? First, some offense had to happen. We're talking things like adultery, cruelty, or just abandoning the family. Then, the so-called innocent spouse would go to court. They'd have to bring evidence and prove the other person's guilt. Only if the judge agreed and found the other party at fault could the divorce happen. It was all about accusation and defense. What's really wild is that as different communities started using this fault-based model, they all had different ideas about what fault actually was. For example, adultery was grounds for divorce under Hindu and Parsi law, but not under the Dissolution of Muslim Marriage Act. A husband failing to provide for his wife was a reason for Muslim women to get a divorce, but not for others. So you ended up with this complicated patchwork of laws, all built on this one core idea of blame. But this whole blame game had a massive flaw. What if your marriage is falling apart, but you can't actually prove your spouse is guilty of some specific listed offense? This led to the next big leap in thinking. What if we just agree to end it? This is the question that the fault theory just had no answer for. Sometimes marriages just break down. There isn't a bad guy, there isn't a single person to point the finger at. So the law needed a new approach, one that didn't require a villain. The logic here is actually simple and pretty powerful. If you have the freedom to marry someone, you should also have the freedom to divorce them. If a marriage starts with the consent of two people, then if both of them withdraw that consent, that should be enough to end it. This was a huge shift from punishing a guilty person to just recognizing the choices of two individuals. But, of course, this theory wasn't a silver bullet. It actually created its own dilemma. On the one hand, people worried it would make divorce too easy, that couples might just give up during a rough patch instead of trying to work through it. But on the other hand, it could make divorce impossible. If one person desperately wanted out, but the other refused to agree, maybe out of spite, maybe for other reasons, well, the first person was just completely stuck.
So this dilemma, where the fault system was too much like a fight and the consent system could be a trap, led to the most modern and pragmatic idea of all, the irretrievable breakdown theory.
This quote from a Law Commission report just perfectly captures the spirit of this new idea. The goal of the law shouldn't be to punish people or keep them trapped in a miserable life. It should be to look at a marriage, see that it's over in all but name, that it's just an empty shell, and then provide a decent, dignified way to end it.
The breakdown theory moves past both blame and consent. It asks a much simpler question. Has this marriage broken down so completely that there's really no reasonable chance of these two people ever getting back together? If the answer is yes, then the law should just acknowledge that reality and grant the divorce.
Now, this idea was introduced into Indian law very carefully. At first, back in 1964, it was kind of an indirect path. If a couple got a legal separation and lived apart for a year without getting back together, either of them could then ask for divorce. Later, the Supreme Court made it clear that this meant even the spouse who was originally found at fault could file. That really sealed the deal. The goal was to end a dead marriage, not to punish someone forever. So after this long and winding journey, where are we now? We've gone from an unbreakable vow to a blame game to mutual agreement, and finally to just recognizing when something's broken. The result is a truly complex legal mosaic. Indian law today doesn't just pick one of these theories. It's a hybrid, a system that has bits and pieces from all of them. It really reflects the entire journey we've just talked about, a mix of ancient tradition and modern real-world problems. And this really gives you the whole picture. A modern marriage under Hindu law still needs a religious ceremony, which points back to its sacramental roots. But it also has contractual parts. And when it comes to ending it, all three doors are open. You can still sue for divorce based on fault, you can end it by mutual consent, or you can use the breakdown principle. It's a combination of every single stage of its long evolution.
So, we've gone from an eternal, unbreakable vow to this complex legal system with multiple options. The definition of marriage has truly gone through a revolution. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. As our ideas about relationships and personal freedom and what a partnership even is continue to change, what's the next reinvention of this ancient institution going to look like?